Hello everyone, my name is MIRRORLESS, and in today's video we'll be talking about what Sony camera you should be getting in 2021. So it's great to see you back here on the channel. My name is MIRRORLESS and I create weekly content on filmmaking, photography, and gear review. If that's something you think you'll be into, hit that subscribe button to be in the know of future content. If you're in the lookout for a new mirrorless camera, particularly a Sony mirrorless camera, there are a ton of options for you to pick right now. And it can be very confusing when you have the a6100, a6300, a6500, a6400, a6600, a7c, a7 III. So many of them, it's hard to keep track and it's hard to know which one will fit your needs. So I hope that today's video can be some sort of a quick guide for you to make an informed decision on which Sony camera you should get. And for this video, I'll be focusing on all the cameras under the $2,000 range. I'll be going over a list of specs that each of these cameras have, and I'll be telling you what I think might be the best camera for your use if you are a filmmaker, photographer, or someone who just wants to shoot for YouTube. So in the $2,000 range for Sony Alpha mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras, there are two options in the full frame system, and there are a bunch of other options in the APS-C system. So full frame sensors have the same dimensions as 35mm film, whereas a crop sensor or an APS-C camera refers to a sensor that is smaller than that. Another common type of crop sensor camera is also the micro four thirds systems that you find in some Panasonic and Olympus cameras, for example. And as you can see from this chart, the sensor of an iPhone's camera is a lot smaller than that of a full frame camera. So a couple of advantages of getting a full frame camera versus an APS-C camera is that you get a broader dynamic range, better ISO, and low light performance, as well as a shallower depth of field. So if you really want a blurry background, a full frame camera is going to do that a lot better than an APS-C camera. And the advantages of a crop sensor camera is its compact size and it's usually more cheap than a full frame camera. And because it's a crop sensor, you also get a little bit more of zoom, a little bit more of reach if you wanted to use it for wildlife photography or something like that. But honestly, in the last few years, APS-C cameras have come a long way, and the image quality that comes out of one of these cameras is comparable to a full frame camera. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about a few APS-C cameras that I think you should consider in 2021. So we have the a6100, a6400, and the a6600. So all of these three cameras came out around the same time in 2019. And the cheapest one is the a6100 at $748 US. The a6400 is similarly priced, it's about $898. And at about $500 more expensive, you get the a6600 at $1,398. For both the a6100 and the a6400, you can add $100 and get a kit lens. Whereas for the a6600, you need to add about $400 and get yourself a kit lens as well. I don't recommend getting a kit lens though, just because kit lenses aren't that great, but if your budget is really tight and you need a lens to shoot right away, then I guess you just have to get the kit lens for now. But if you can, try to save that money and get yourself a better lens. There are a bunch of budget-friendly options out there, but I can't cover them all in this video or else this video will be very long. But let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to make a future video about what high quality lenses are out there that don't break the bank. All of these three cameras have the same megapixel count at about 24 megapixels. They are all Sony E-mount and are all crop sensor APS-C cameras. In terms of focus, they all have the same focus points at 425 for face detection, and they all have the new real-time eye autofocus on video mode. The LCD screen is also the same on all of these three cameras. You get the tilt function as well as the flip out function, so you can see yourself if you want to vlog or see yourself when you're recording. In terms of in-body stabilization, only the a6600 has it. The other two do not have it. And if you're someone who likes to shoot video handheld, then that's one thing you might like to consider. There is no recording limit on any of these three cameras, and in terms of video specs, they all have the same specs. They all shoot 4K up to 30 frames per second, and in 1080p, it goes all the way to 120 frames per second. The a6100 and the a6400, they use the same old Sony battery, which is a very bad battery. It was the same battery used in the a6300 and the a6500, whereas the a6600 uses the new Sony batteries, which have a lot more juice than the old ones. In terms of video recording time, Sony claims that the new battery records at about 150 minutes consistently, whereas the old battery only about 75. So that is almost double the amount of juice that you get with the new battery. On the audio side, all of these three cameras have a 3.5mm input for your mic, which means that you can add in your external shotgun mic to get better audio. The only difference in this aspect is that only the a6600 has a jack for headphones. So if you want to monitor your audio live on camera, then you can only do it on this new a6600. And for anyone who is serious about doing video, the a6100 does not have flat picture profiles. If you're a bit more serious about video and you want to color correct or color grade your footage, then the a6400 and a6600 are going to give you S-Log profiles and HLG profiles, so you can do just that. So now that we've gone over the new APS-C cameras, there are a few honorable mentions that I would like to talk about. The first one is the a6000. This camera came out in 2014 and currently sits at about $648. This camera is one of the most sold mirrorless cameras on the market, and despite it being about 5 years old, the amount of value that you get out of this camera compared to the price that you pay is very, very good. The other two honorable mentions are the a6300 and the a6500. These are really good cameras if you are very serious about video making and filmmaking. If you wanted something a little bit cheaper, you could probably pick these ones up in the used market since they've been out for quite a few years now. But in my opinion, getting these cameras doesn't really future-proof yourself. You might feel in the need of getting a newer camera body down the road, say a couple years from now. One thing I want to mention though, all of these model numbers are not sequential. So the a6100 is newer than the a6500 and the a6300. So you can see where this all gets very, very confusing. I'm not sure why Sony named these models the way they did, but it is what it is. So if you're looking for an APS-C camera, which one should you buy? If you are primarily a photographer, I would definitely recommend picking up the a6100. That way you save more money that you can invest on better lenses. The megapixel count, the ability to shoot raw images, and the fact that it has very good autofocus makes this a very good choice if you're primarily a photographer. If you're primarily a filmmaker, a videographer, then the a6600 would be the one to go. It has in-body image stabilization and it has a headphone jack. It also has flat picture profiles and also the new Sony battery, which will give you a lot more power for your long video shoots. And trust me, having a bigger battery makes a big difference. I remember shooting weddings on the a6500, which has the older battery that the a61 and a6400 have. I remember being a little bit stressed when shooting long ceremonies because I had to constantly monitor the battery levels and making sure that I had spare batteries to make that swap really quickly. But if you want to save 500 bucks, then the a6400 would be a very good choice as well. The only difference is that you won't get in-body image stabilization, which can easily be fixed by just using tripods, gimbals, sliders, and other stabilizers. You will still get the flat color picture profiles on the a6400, which makes it really good for video. So that was the APS-C camera guide. Now I'm gonna go over the full frame camera guide, which is a little easier to understand because there are only two cameras in the sub $2,000 range. On the one hand, we have the a7 III, which came out early 2018, and on the other hand, newer a7C, which came out just last year. Even though the a7C is a newer camera, it's $200 cheaper than the a7 III actually. But because the a7 III has been out for quite a couple of years now, you can probably find it in the used market as well. These two cameras are actually very, very similar. They both have the same megapixel count, they both have in-body image stabilization. Only the a7C has real-time eye autofocus for both video and audio mode, whereas the a7 III only has it for photo mode. The a7C has a slightly better autofocus. They both also use the same battery, and in terms of video specs, they all have the same specs. 4K at 30 frames per second and 1080p up to 120 frames per second. They both have mic jacks and headphone jacks. And they all have flat picture profiles, S-Log and HLG. There are a few main differences that you should keep in mind though. The a7C does not have a recording limit, whereas the a7 III has a 30-minute recording limit. The a7C also has a fully articulating screen. The a7 III unfortunately does not have it. It just has that tilt screen, which is not enough for most of the cases if you're trying to get a high shot or a low shot, or if you want to just see yourself when you're recording. Another difference is that the a7C only has one single SD card slot, whereas the a7 III has a double SD card slot. This would be particularly useful if you want redundancy in your recording or in your photos, so that you can have your camera record to both SD cards simultaneously, so you can have an extra copy in case one of those SD cards fails. So it's good to have for peace of mind if you do a lot of weddings, for example. So the a7C is a smaller camera, it's more compact, but because of that, you also lose a little bit of physical buttons and an extra dial. If you're someone who likes to customize your buttons on your camera and you want to have quick access to different settings, then you'll lack some of that with the a7C. But if you're looking for a full frame Sony mirrorless camera in 2021, I'll recommend that you get the a7C as opposed to a7 III. If you get it new, it's $200 cheaper and the specs are pretty much the same anyway, so might as well just get the newer camera. So that's it for today's video. There's actually a lot more camera specs that I didn't go over, but for me, these are the main ones that I would consider when purchasing a new camera. So I hope today's video gave you a better understanding on what Sony cameras are available out there in the under $2,000 mark. So that's it for today's video. If you're still watching, thank you so much for sticking along. And hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And that is all for today, guys. Until next time.